Stephen Barker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I thought the Honourable Lady, the member for Liverpool Wavertree, spoke very powerfully about emotive and clearly tragic cases, and I'm sure all members of the House join with her in paying tribute to the families of those victims. And she is right that that piece of legislation introduced by a previous government did not achieve the desired outcomes. I think most of us would accept that. And perhaps counterintuitively, therefore, I, in opening my remarks, would like to pay tribute to a piece of legislation introduced by the party opposite, because I think the role of PCSOs in tackling antisocial behaviour has been much maligned over the years. It was a measure opposed at the time by my party. And yet when I look at the work of Aivaras Krochalev and other PCSOs in my constituency who has done so much work, particularly with the community where English is not a first language, it's very clear that many PCSOs have helped in terms of freeing up officer time and delivering value for money on the front line rather than being sat at headquarters behind desks. And it's for that reason I welcome the Home Secretary's measures in the bill that strengthen some of the powers available to PCSOs. For example, it's illogical, Madam Deputy Speaker, for a PCSO to be able to disperse a group, but not to be able to disperse an individual. And the bill is right to give discretion to senior officers to tackle that. It's also illogical for PCSOs to be able to fill out forms in those instances, but not actually issue the forms. And the streamlining of some of these powers that apply to PCSOs actually, I think, will free up police officer time for doing the things that warrant officers should be dealing. And so it's following that logic, if I may press the Minister, to look at some other areas where the powers of the PCSOs are not aligned with the responsibilities they could take on. And just for illustrative purposes, if I could, for example, flag that a PSO is able to seize drugs, but is not able to search for drugs. They can search for alcohol, they can search for tobacco. If they happen to find drugs in the course of those searches, they can confiscate them. But if they can smell cannabis, they can't actually search for cannabis. They have to divert the time of a warranted officer. And certainly the feedback I receive from senior officers is that they do not feel that is effective use of police time. Likewise, on what are pretty minor issues, but annoying to officers all the same. For example, a PCSO can issue a fixed penalty notice for someone who is cycling on a towpath. We don't have many towpaths in my constituency, but I'm sure the member for Cambridge finds this a particularly useful option for PCSOs. And yet PCSOs cannot issue a fixed penalty notice for cycling without lights. And there's a number of other areas. I simply cite those two as illustrative, but I think if you follow the logic of the bill and the very welcome measures in terms of areas like dispersal, then there's other areas where PCSOs could take on more powers in tackling antisocial behaviour, and that would free up police officer time in order to do so. I wasn't sure if it, yeah. So if I can draw the Minister's attention to that area. And another issue where the bill doesn't tackle what could be done is around the cross-departmental working between departments to actually enforce measures dealing with antisocial behaviour. To bring that to life, last year, for all the foreign vehicles, estimated over 15,000 foreign vehicles on our road, and as the Minister will be aware, once they're here for more than 6 months, they have to be MOT'd, insured, registered. There was not a single prosecution last year for any foreign vehicle on the UK roads which had not registered. And it's illogical to assume that every single foreign vehicle on our roads has complied with that 6-month requirement to register. And part of the frustration that Cambridgeshire Police and others have is there seems to be an intransigence within DVLA that will use automatic registration recognition for cases of stolen vehicles, but they will not use it for issues of licensing of foreign vehicles. And that has a knock-on effect in terms of some of the community tension issues we see in my community, where people feel they have to insure and register their car, but that others do not do so. And clearly there needs to be discussions between the Home Office and the Department of Transport. And I'd be grateful if the Minister could write to me to confirm that he will take forward that aspect of cross-departmental working, which is causing some considerable annoyance in the cases coming before me in my constituency through my surgery. Another area where significant time is being wasted at present, where again cross-departmental working is suboptimum, is in terms of licensing. It may surprise the House that an area like Wisbech in my constituency has more licensed premises in the centre than a student area like Cambridge. And indeed we are using existing powers around the cumulative number of licensing premises to try and effect a change. But it's also clear that where the police do make representations, significant time is being spent compiling very long reports, which are then often ignored by local councils. And it's clear that further work would be beneficial between the Home Office and the Department of Communities and Local Government to look at whether the police representations and the time involved in cases like licensing or antisocial behaviour in communities is being used as effectively as it might. The other aspect where the measures in this bill are very welcome will only be welcome if they are actually enforced. And one of the dangers and the traps I think we fall into in this place is our rush to legislate and to suspect that in doing so, in bringing forward a bill on antisocial behaviour, then we have effected the change that we are seeking. And it's quite clear that in terms of some of the existing measures to tackle antisocial behaviour, the enforcement is not currently taking place. And as an example of that, in my constituency on New Year's Eve, we had an illegal rave. And it may surprise the House to learn that the police were at the scene of the illegal rave, but quite understandably, because of the numbers of people there, took the view that it was not safe for them to intervene at that point. But it's reasonable to expect that having been on site when the illegality was happening, when the business owner took countless photos of those responsible, when I spoke to the Home Secretary, no less, to discuss the case, and she expressed her horror and shock and her desire for enforcement, that I should discover last week, without the police having the courtesy to tell me, that after 6 months they've simply dropped the investigation. And it's difficult for the community to understand, well, exactly what evidence do they need in order to tackle it when they're there at the scene of the crime when it happens. And so I very much welcome the measures on antisocial behaviour in this bill. But I would be grateful if the Minister would take this issue up with the Chief Constable for Cambridgeshire to address why a case like that, where over £50,000 of damage was committed on New Year's Eve, where other business owners are concerned about it, why no enforcement action is taking place. I'm conscious, Madam Chair, of your diktat on time, and with a minute remaining, let me finish on a positive note, which is under the wonderful leadership of Inspector Sissons in Wisbech, we have launched Operation Pheasant, which so far has raided 80 houses of multiple occupation. It has a number of live inquiries, and it demonstrates what can be achieved when effective enforcement action takes place. That wouldn't, Madam Deputy Speaker, have happened without the active support of the Home Secretary. Her support and the measures in this bill, I think, will do much to tackle other cases of antisocial behaviour in the months and years ahead.